Welcome in, everyone. We're diving deep into something pretty major happening right now. As of today, April 9th, 2025, it's this rapidly escalating trade war between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, a lot's happening right now, and you've given us a ton of material to go through, news articles, summaries, the whole works.
And I think our goal here is to pull out what's really important for you.
Yep.
Cut through all the noise and get to the bottom of what's going on. Who are the major players? What are the potential consequences? What do you really need to know to stay informed without getting totally overwhelmed?
Exactly right.
So we're looking at a timeline that starts with some existing U.S. tariffs, then moves through President Trump's new tariff policy announcement. And then we get to today, April 9th, and the immediate aftermath, which has been pretty dramatic, to say the least.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right, so let's jump right in. What was the initial spark that really set off this latest escalation?
Well, looking through all these sources, it seems pretty clear that the main trigger was President Trump's sweeping new tariff policy, as it's being called. That immediately set off this back and forth, this what some are calling reciprocal tariff battle between the U.S. and China.
And the first big move came from the U.S. side, right?
Absolutely. In fact, earlier this morning, April 9th, the U.S. slapped a hefty 104% duty on all goods coming in from China.
Wow, 104%. That's a...
It's a big jump, almost double the 54% duty that was in place just last week. And, it's important to remember that this didn't come out of nowhere. It follows China's initial countermeasures to some earlier U.S. tariffs. That was around April 2nd.
Right, right. And just to add a little context here, there was already some tension brewing. The sources mentioned that the U.S. had previously placed tariffs on China and also on Canada and Mexico, all because of concerns about fentanyl trafficking. So it wasn't like everything was totally fine, and then suddenly...
Yeah, exactly. This latest tariff hike is building on this existing foundation of trade friction. But that move to 104% duty, that was really the catalyst for this much stronger reaction from China.
And China didn't hesitate to respond. Their response was pretty big, too. Right?
Oh, yeah. Almost as soon as those U.S. tariffs kicked in, China announced they'd be hitting back. They're putting an 84% tariff on goods coming from the U.S. And what's really interesting here is that this is also a significant increase from the 34% they were talking about before.
So both sides are upping the ante pretty dramatically.
Yeah, definitely. And to make things even more intense, those new Chinese tariffs, they're set to go into effect tomorrow, April 10th.
So a very quick and powerful countermove. Did China have anything official to say about all of this?
They did. China's finance ministry put out a statement, and they didn't mince words. They called the U.S. action a mistake on top of a mistake.
Ooh, strong words.
Yeah, they said it infringes on their rights and undermines global trade. It's a pretty strong condemnation of what the U.S. is doing.
It sounds like we've got a real standoff here, with neither side backing down. One of the experts you sent me even used a pretty colorful phrase to describe it.
Oh, yeah, Ting Lu, he's the chief China economist over at Nomura. He called this an unprecedented and expensive game of chicken. He basically thinks neither side is ready to give in.
Which makes you wonder, where does this all go from here? I mean, this can't be good for the global economy. Did U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent have anything to say about all this?
He did. He said he was disappointed that China didn't seem interested in negotiating. He actually thinks these retaliatory tariffs are a losing proposition for Beijing in the long run. And he had some harsh words for China in general, calling them the worst offender in the international trading system, saying their economy is way out of balance.
Okay, so we've got these two very strong stances, and it doesn't sound like anyone's in the mood to talk. What about the markets? How are they reacting to all of this?
Well, not well, let's just say that. The reports describe the global market reaction as extremely negative. I mean, we're talking about words like pummeling being thrown around. There's been a savage sell-off in U.S. bonds, which is pretty alarming.
Yes.
Well, when U.S. bond prices drop that much, it usually means that foreign investors are getting nervous and might start pulling their money out of U.S. assets. It's a sign that they're losing confidence.
So it's not just the U.S. and China involved here. This is having ripple effects all over the world.
Exactly. And it's not just bonds either. Stock markets around the world are also taking a hit. European shares have been dropping. Oil prices plummeted to a 4-year low. Even U.S. stock index futures are down sharply, which means the U.S. market is expecting more losses tomorrow. The S&P 500, it actually had its biggest single-day loss since it was created back in the 1950s. It's officially in what's called a bear market now.
Bear market, that sounds bad.
It can be. Basically, it means a prolonged period of falling stock prices. It often goes hand in hand with an economic recession. And the S&P 500 isn't alone. South Korea's Kospi index also entered a bear market. And we've seen big drops in Shanghai and Hong Kong stocks ever since that first U.S. tariff announcement on April 2nd.
So it's a pretty widespread market shock. Are these drops connected to broader economic concerns?
Definitely. All this market instability is directly linked to worries about slower economic growth, possibly higher inflation, and lower profits for companies. Investors are nervous. They're worried about the negative impact this trade war could have on the global economy.
And it's not just the U.S. and China involved, right? Other countries are reacting too.
That's right. The European Union is actually gearing up to take countermeasures against President Trump's tariffs. They've proposed extra duties, mostly 25%, on a bunch of U.S. imports. And those measures, they're expected to get approved later today, April 9th.
So the EU is ready to push back too. And as we mentioned earlier, Canada's been hit with tariffs too, right? It seems like there's a growing international resistance to these U.S. policies.
Absolutely. This is much bigger than just a U.S.-China issue. Other big economies are feeling the pressure, and like the EU, they're starting to react.
Okay, let's go back to President Trump for a minute. What's his reasoning behind these tariffs? Why is he doing this?
Well, if you go by what he's saying, his main goal is to wipe out the U.S. trade deficit with other countries. He also sees tariffs as a way to force other leaders into making trade deals that are better for the U.S. He even boasted at a Republican event just a few days ago, on Tuesday, that world leaders are kissing his ass and begging for deals.
That's quite a picture he's painting. And he's been using his social media platform, Truth Social, to get his message out too, right?
Yeah, he's been urging companies to move their operations to the U.S., promising them zero tariffs if they do. He's also dangling fast-tracked approvals for things like energy hookups and cutting through environmental red tape. Basically, he's trying to make the U.S. as attractive as possible for businesses to relocate here.
It sounds like he's trying to boost U.S. manufacturing and bring jobs back.
That seems to be the idea.
But it's interesting because the sources mention he's called these tariffs permanent sometimes, but then other times he says they're just a negotiating tactic. Those two things seem kind of contradictory, don't they?
They do a little bit, yeah. Is this a big change in U.S. trade policy where tariffs are here to stay? Or is it all just a bluff to force other countries to make concessions? It could be a bit of both, which adds to the uncertainty and makes it hard to predict what's going to happen next.
And what about China? Are they doing anything besides just slapping tariffs back on the U.S.?
Yeah, they're doing a few other things. First, their currency, the offshore yuan, the one traded outside of China, it's been taking a real beating because of these tariffs. It's hit record lows, actually.
Wow, so this is impacting their currency too.
It is. And China's central bank is trying to manage this. They've reportedly told state-owned banks to ease up on buying U.S. dollars. They're trying to prevent a sudden drop in the yuan, which could really destabilize things further.
So they're trying to control the economic fallout, but are they going after U.S. companies directly too?
They are. Beijing just announced restrictions on 18 more U.S. companies, most of them in defense industries. This comes on top of the companies already facing penalties in China because of the tariffs. Now we're talking about something like 60 U.S. firms facing restrictions. China's not just playing defense here, they're going on offense too.
So things are getting pretty serious. We've got a real economic battle going on. You know, one of the sources had some actual numbers on the trade imbalance between the U.S. and China. What did those numbers show?
The numbers were for 2024. The U.S. exported $143.5 billion worth of goods to China, but it imported a whopping $438.9 billion from China. So that's a pretty significant trade deficit for the U.S.
Yeah, no kidding.
And the source said that China sees this big trade surplus with the U.S. as something that's just going to happen no matter what.
Yeah.
Which probably affects how they approach these negotiations.
It's like they don't see it as a problem that needs fixing.
Right.
All right, so let's sum this all up. We've seen a very sudden and dramatic increase in tariffs from both the U.S. and China. This has caused major global markets to freak out, with investors selling off bonds and stocks like crazy. And the really scary part is that neither side seems ready to back down or negotiate. It's making everyone really nervous, especially with the EU now preparing to take its own countermeasures.
Yeah, I think unprecedented really is the right word here. The speed and the scale of these tariff hikes, plus the fact that neither side seems willing to budge even a little, it's a recipe for serious economic trouble, not just for the U.S. and China, but for the whole world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into what is clearly a rapidly changing situation, I want to leave you with a final thought. We live in a world where everything's connected, right? The global economy is incredibly complex and intertwined. So with that in mind, what are the potential long-term consequences of this escalating trade war? And I'm talking about consequences that go beyond those immediate market drops and the direct impacts on the U.S. and China. How might this affect different industries, supply chains, maybe even your own job or your investments? It's a complicated picture, and we're still in the early stages, so the full impact of all of this is probably still a ways off, but it's definitely something worth thinking about.
Couldn't agree more. This is something everyone needs to be paying attention to.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more analysis on this and other important global events.
See you then.
Bye, everyone.